Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're really excited to have you here today. We're going to be diving into an incredibly interesting and relevant topic today, and that is 5 tips for a modern composable tech stack. We have an excellent panel here to dive into this topic, and I wanted to just take a moment to introduce all of our speakers. First, I'm Bridget Roman. I am on the product marketing team at Cloudinary. And I will be hosting and moderating this group of experts today, starting with John Piniella. He is Group Vice President of Global Commerce Alliances and Strategy at Publicis Sapient. We also have Nick Borth, Chief of Staff to the CEO at Contentstack, and Milan Panser, the VP of Product Marketing from Cloudinary. So we'll be taking you through the 5 tips today for modern composable architecture and doing kind of a round robin, getting different perspectives from these 3 speakers, and looking forward to taking you through this. So before we dive in, I would love to just level set on where we are today with what we consider a modern composable architecture. So this is really next generation technology that provides flexible architecture for faster time to market. So as you can see here, it's really made up of a scalable architecture, flexibility, extensibility. This is developer first and best of breed. And by that, we mean essentially bringing together your best of breed technologies into one tech stack, giving you the flexibility and all of the options to choose the technologies you would like to use and put them together in one cohesive tech stack. And I think what's really important to make sure everyone is aware of, there is actually a mock alliance. And this is an organization that got started about a year ago. Wanted to talk just about them for 1 minute because I don't think the mock alliance is very well known yet. And we want to take a minute to make sure we introduce you to this organization. It's really important to understand that the mock alliance kind of came together with a whole host of companies that have become mock certified. So when we think about mock, this is really an acronym for microservices, API first, cloud native, headless. And this essentially is an organization that certifies a whole host of companies to make sure that they meet the high standards of this mock organization. And I wanted to just share a graphic that's straight off of their website, so you can kind of understand and see this type of architecture in a visual way that we're going to be talking about today. And you can see on the left and the right side, we've kind of blown out the experience management side, the media side. So with Contentstack and with Cloudinary, we're going to be able to dive in as we go through these 5 tips and really get a feel for what we're talking about when it comes to content management and visual media as it applies to these 5 tips for composable modern architecture. Okay, so with that, let's dive in. And this is when our panel is going to get to speak about each of these topics and tips and give us really great perspective on each one. So tip number 1, when we think about modern architecture and composable tech stacks, the first important thing is to really consider omni-channel. And I'd love to throw this one to John Piniella first. This is really, I think, a great topic for Publicis to speak about. What does it mean to be truly omni-channel? And John, why is this the first and most important tip?
Thanks, Bridget. I think it's so important because when you're dealing with your consumer, you don't know where you're going to be touching that consumer. They could be in your store. They could be on your website. They could be on a mobile app. They could be looking at one of your products in Amazon. And the key is wherever you touch that client, the experience should be the same. If they see inconsistent experience from when they're in store versus when they're online, they're going to get frustrated and they're not going to be as loyal to your brand. So from that perspective, I think Omni is so important. And that's where, to me, composability in modern architecture comes in. Because what it does is it gives you the flexibility to, no matter whether it's a promotional email that you're sending to that person, or whether it's they just walked into your store and looked at something on a kiosk, you want to make sure you know that customer, you're touching them in the same way, and you're giving them an experience that they're going to want to come back to. And they're going to then, the next time they interact with you, which may be at a totally different point, they're going to have that same experience. And the composable architecture gives you the ability to leverage those services and capabilities no matter where that touch point is, which is so different than the days of kind of the monolith, where what you had in store, what you had online were potentially very different.
That's terrific. And Nick, I'd love to hear your perspective on the content management side of this when we think about omnichannel. How does Contentstack think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think John brought up a great point in the sense that we at Contentstack view CMS's role as really being kind of the chief of consistency, right? So when our clients are building out digital experiences, what we find across all industries is that they look at the customer experience and kind of target profile first, and then look at all the different ways that they interact with them and say, why does my digital experience have to be any different apart from leveraging the strengths of that digital service? And so what we're finding in terms of centralizing the content and helping to manage and distribute that easily is that you need to be able to have a consistent content-backed experience that goes throughout all the different channels that you're interacting with your clients on. And those channels are becoming more and more varied, but the newer channels that are arising happen to be more in the digital world. And so it's ever important that you're able to both house the and manage the content centrally, but also then serve a growing number of stakeholders within your organization who manage those channels, because we're getting new millennial recent college grads to manage channels that are unfamiliar to the traditional digital experience team. And the digital experience teams aren't that old. In the sense of being formed in these companies, right? They're maybe over the last decade or less. So, moral of the story is that consistency is key when it comes to content, and really making sure that you're getting the right information to your buyer at the right time.
Right. And Milind, when we think about content and specifically visual media, images, videos, et cetera, what's your perspective on this tip?
Yeah, I think, John and Nick brought up some really interesting points. Many of our customers, when they're thinking omnichannel, they're thinking about the consistency of those visuals, as John mentioned. But the consistency gets ever more complicated when you have lots of images and videos, because you have product imagery, you have lifestyle imagery. You have offers, which are composites of text and imagery that are very specific. And then all of that has to go into your flagship store, into channel stores, into print, into digital channels that are owned, like your .com or your app or whatever it might be. And then all of that also has to go on paid channels. And, really following the customer on a journey with either specific engagement or specific offers becomes humanly impossible. It doesn't matter how many designers you have upstream creating the content, creating those images and videos so that they look good on your iPhone or they look good on a digital sign, or the same offer is overlaid with the same text and your brand text in a particular place on print, for example, becomes impossible. So that's where this best of breed composability in the stack, where our solutions like Cloudinary, which can composite and transform images and video, actually check the bandwidth that somebody's getting. That's another little twist to this. It's not just viewports and form factors and devices. It's also, are they on a good bandwidth? And keeping that experience consistent becomes really hard. So you have to go to best of breed technologies like a composable CMS, a composable media management stack, in order to deliver that experience that consumers demand, frankly, now.
That's great. All right. So I think we got a lot of really good insights there into what the importance of omnichannel and how to think about omnichannel. So when we think about tip number 2, let's dive into that one. It's all about differentiation and hyper personalization. So John, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how modern architecture enables differentiated experiences.
Yeah, no, and it's really critical to make it happen, because you look at it. I talk to retailers all the time and brands, and 20% of your clients tend to do 80% of your business. Those are the loyal clients that you've got to build upon. If they shop with you 5 times a year, you want them to shop with you 6 times a year. If they buy put 10 items in their cart, you want them to put 12 items in their cart. That's where you're going to build the business. It's not the transient customer that just comes by once in a while. So from that perspective, as Nick and Millen were both talking about, from a personalization perspective, I love the term hyper-personalization, because I think what it is you want to feel like an individual if you're one of that 20%. The 80%, you'll know some things about where they are, maybe a little bit about their history. But those 20%, everything they buy, everything they shop for, where else they shop. And you want to make sure that you're able to, when they come in, you can anticipate proactively what they're going to be looking for, what deals are going to work with them, what promotions you want to send to them. And even when they walk in the store, you should know who they are and immediately go up and say, "Hey, John, good to see you again. Or are you looking for something for X, Y, or Z?" from that perspective. And a composable architecture, what that lets you do is really differentiate around things like personalized search, personalized content, ensuring that, the videos, the reviews, the recommendations that they get are very much custom to them. So from my perspective, I think without composability, you get a lot of kind of semi-good recommendations. With a composable solution, where you can really differentiate around intelligent search, around intelligent content, really truly lets you differentiate.
Great. And Nick, what do you think the tools are that you need to accomplish differentiation and hyper-personalization from your perspective?
Yeah, I think you have to look at both the tools and the team or the resources kind of in conjunction. But when we look at it in terms of first and foremost having a CMS that is adaptable to the varying degrees of tools that serve different channels. It used to be that we oversimplified this discussion into front end, back end, and it's gotten to be a lot more nuanced, to our earlier point on just kind of where content needs to be delivered, and based on that channel, what type of tooling and or nuance exists in that content delivery and in that digital experience. And so what we're finding is that you need to be able to partner with folks like Cloudinary and others that can help to provide kind of that nuance and support for hyper-personalization, to John's point.
Millen, do you think you can add something around the value of doing this work?
Definitely. I think, personalization goes kind of hand in hand with the problem we talked about earlier, which is being truly omni-channel as well. So when you look at the number of images and videos that you need for your brand experience, and then you add in all the channels that you need to do this on, and then you start talking about segmentation, and it's a continuum of segmentation for many of our customers. Many of them are sophisticated in their use of CDPs, customer data platforms, and a very specific segmentation that they use for their brand in order to create those or curate those journeys that are hyper localized in some cases. If you know enough information to know the geography, or maybe enough to know the time of day, maybe they're as simple as hyper seasonal. That it's autumn or it's Thanksgiving, and then maybe you have someone on app or in store, and this is a VIP customer. Now, for each of these to have the right offer at the right time, a price-sensitive customer that versus a last-minute shopper, versus the seasonality, you need slightly different imagery and video. And then to the earlier point of omni-channel, that consistency of it following across from owned media all the way to paid media, right, means that you need to transform this. It's humanly impossible. So you have to kind of code this in with integrations back in to your CDP, integrations to the CMS. And all of this is where I think this API first composable architecture really outshines the kind of monolithic approach, where you can be as granular as your business intelligence allows you to be, or as you want to be, right? So that's, I think that applies really well for what we see customers doing in terms of personalizing their images and video. Just to throw in one last example there, when you look at some customers, they actually keep composites of imagery in multi-layer PSDs, for example. And then on the fly, they'll decide, oh, we need to put layer 4 and 5 because this is Italy, and that's where my Italian text is. And so you conditionally compose this image, and maybe it even has a different layer of models because you're using localized models in an Asian market or versus in a European market. So that's, there's some really fascinating uses of this technology that I've been seeing with several customers.
So interesting. All right. So let's think about our next tip, tip 3. We're saying keep it simple. So when it comes to putting together these composable tech stacks, the name of the game is keeping it simple. And John, I'd love to hear your perspective on evolution versus revolution. And you're working with customers all the time. You're consulting with them and guiding them, many times transitioning them from monolith to a composable modern tech stack. So when we think about evolution versus revolution and maybe taking more of a bite-sized approach versus doing it all at once, what's your perspective and how do you guide customers along that route?
Yeah, the days of the big bang are just past. Customers or our clients are too mature. They already have very large customer bases. They already have websites that are depended on by those customers. You can't just take the risk of doing a big bang and trying to replace everything at once. What if you screw up your search? What if you screw up the content? What if you create a situation where they're not even getting the experience they're getting today? So the idea of keeping it simple from my perspective is the basis of composability, is I bring in a bit of it at a time. I bring in a new content solution to solve some of the personalization problems. I bring in a new search solution and I do it in an evolutionary manner. I don't try to replace everything at once. And what else does that do for you? Well, as Melinda was talking about the idea of value and getting time to market, what it does is it gets you to market more quickly. And then what it allows you to do is then fund the next steps in that process. It's critical from that perspective. Let's say I put in my content management solution first. Now I have very rich content. I bring in the visual solution. Now I've got rich visual content to go with the textual content, and I'm doing that across all channels. I don't need to replace my shopping cart. I don't need to replace my catalog. There's no reason for me to take the risk of those things where the huge impact is going to come from those other pieces. So that's why I feel very strongly about the idea of keeping it simple and really going in a truly evolutionary manner.
John, can you talk a second about this idea of not getting too caught up on every service needing a unique integration because of modern architecture? A little bit on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, right now today, why it's so painful if you're in the monolith, and even if you've started to use some third-party services, if I'm using a content solution today and I want to bring in a new one, I'm going to have to change all my APIs. I'm going to have to change all my data integrations. I'm going to have to change everything I do. Well, the entire idea of composability, and for folks like us and my friends here on this, is the idea of it is I can change quickly. If I have a consistent way of my integration going, and you mentioned the whole idea of mock and the A in that being API first, you keep those APIs consistent. If all of a sudden I'm using a certain, say, search solution, and a new one comes out that has some great feature, I shouldn't be having to do a huge build and release to put that out there. I should just be able to plug it in because I'm using the API first manner. I plug it in, I do my testing, boom, I take advantage of it. So that's absolutely the key from a composability standpoint, is how I can substitute those things in and out and do it in a consistent manner.
Nick, I saw you shaking your head in agreement on that. Do you have some comments to add?
Yeah, I mean, Contentstack, when you get to know our story, we were kind of founded on the the concept of composable before it ever existed. I love always talking with our CTO because we come from actually more the integration world, all of us, and the API world. And so our logic prior to composable really becoming a well-adopted or semi-well-adopted trend was that, to John's point, you should just have a consistent integration layer and or access layer, and allow that to help to scale your digital experience, development strategy. And so we very much subscribe to that model. And I think that we've seen it work very well we work with a lot of large consumer brands that, as do all companies on this call, that you probably interact with on a daily basis. And again, as I mentioned, they're still working off of, the consistent, not just consistent content element, consistent experience, but the consistent API layer that they built in earlier iterations on Contentstack years ago. So it's really cool because what it allows customers to do from a business value perspective is to focus on net new and not maintenance, if I'm really frank, right? And I think when you talk to digital experience leaders, that becomes one of the largest points of debt, largest points of pain that a digital experience leader, at least in our experience at Contentstack, can really deal with, because they're trying now to still get the business pressures taken care of while having to consistently maintain what they've already built in terms of the digital experience. So having that consistent interface and leveraging an API first approach and really taking advantage of the true power of consumable as an architecture allows you to really scale quickly. And I see that as probably the number one value add.
I think too, it'd be interesting, Milind, to hear from your perspective on the visual media layer around kind of more of the evolution versus revolution and what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in keeping it simple. I think, one of the beauties of the modern Mark architecture and the diagram that you showed is that you can start anywhere. You can start in any of those columns or at the top or bottom, and you don't have to tackle it all. I mean, if you think a decade ago, digital transformation was all about these massive projects that lasted for months and years in some organizations. And I think we've evolved way beyond that, where now if your pain is truly in your shopping cart, you can address that. If your pain is in the customer data, you can address that part of it. But you can do simple things if your pain is on the visual side. So, COVID was a great example when businesses needed the flexibility to deal with large volumes of video that people were streaming because everyone wanted to see things in store. And all of a sudden, even $10,000 rings were being sold online by luxury brands. So now, you have to be able to spin that in 3D. You have to be able to look at it in a high quality zoom. So you can start there. You can start with the visual experience. Again, when Google rolled out Core Web Vitals, everybody was scrambling last year for simple things like, how do I improve my lowest contentful paint on my banner image? Well, you could start there, and simple optimization and page load time on the visual layer could give you a lot of benefit. So it's a continuum and it's an evolution, and quick small returns and is the new digital transformation. I think is kind of the way to look at it.
That's great. So before we move on to tip 4, we've talked about omnichannel being critical, differentiation, keeping things simple. Tip 4 is really about organizational readiness, and that is key. This is essential. Nick, I know you have really strong opinions about this. So when we think about approaching this, your organization and how you ready the organization, who's involved, let's talk about, do we want to be centralized with this? Do we want to be federated? What are your thoughts on that around the org structure and who's involved?
Yeah, so I often work with our large clients and we talk through how a truly federated, or I hate the term because it's overused, but kind of democratized approach to digital experience is the panacea, right? It's what we want to work towards. Reality is that you can't enable everybody all at once and just spread out a bunch of tools and say, all right, guys, make it work, right? What you have to do is kind of start. So we pose this question as an either or, and it's an and, right? So what happens is the more successful clients end up starting with a centralized strategy that actually does something outside of the software that we all provide, which is has a strong process layer that brings stakeholders in and manages their input, and then allows that input to drive the initial iterations and then the true innovation cycle of an MVP, production ready, et cetera. But where we find folks doing really well is moving from a centralized to ultimate federated model over time, where they are allowing that centralized model to be a foundation and prove success, both from a technical perspective as well as a business perspective and to the organization. And then once you have success, it's a lot easier to get buy-in and or create the knowledge transfer required to federate. Now, my technical comrades would say that there's a little bit more nuance to what I'm saying, in the sense that you can federate some of the underlying services and such, and provide federated access to underlying services as part of this centralized model, but I won't split those hairs. I think suffice to say that when it comes to the strategic level, the takeaway is you want to start centralized and kind of grow and build over time into a more federated model where you find that folks are more self-serving and able to be self-starting in delivering on digital experience.
Nice. John, any thoughts on that you'd add?
Yeah, no, I love the way Nick said it, because really what it is it's back to that idea of evolution versus revolution. In an ideal world, you'd leap to the end stage where every individual store within your system, every country, every brand has full control over everything they do. That's never going to happen up front. That's never going to happen immediately. And in some ways, maybe you don't even want to get all the way to that 100%, because then you start getting into inconsistency. But what you want is a centralized model that's proven, as Nick said, and then be able to start providing capabilities to, first of all, let's start with brands. The brands have the capability to control their brand recognition. Then each country has the ability within that brand to do a bit around localization. And then maybe it gets all the way down to a store level where the store can offer their own promotions and own sets of content around that. But that's, again, back to an evolutionary process of going from that centralized model that you've proven that the organization can handle day one, and then move it eventually to much more of a distributed model.
Milind, who do you think should be on a successful team when we think about organizational readiness and moving, let's say, from the monolith to the composable tech stack?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, it takes a village. And when I say it takes a village, if you think about the media asset lifecycle in an organization, there's creative teams that are creating the original content and the original imagery and videos. But then there's merchandising teams, there's product teams that are in different systems of record. They're working in their PIMS or what have you. And then there are digital marketing teams that are working on creating specific campaigns for .com, for lifestyle blogs, for paid. These are all different people within the organization. And then there's technical teams that really stitch all of this together throughout the MarTech stack and do the integrations, and then make sure that last mile, where that image is finally seen by the customer, looks good, performs fast, and is what was originally intended by the creator. It's an extremely hard problem to solve. So it needs you to be conscious of the people, processes, the systems, and the culture required, right? That being said, it's not that difficult a problem, because when you have API first kind of technologies that you can use, you can actually integrate things back. So it's possible now for the first time for content creators and the creative team to see what that image on the website actually looks like. They can preview those transformations in either their DAM or in some other system of record where they're working. And so starting to stitch these together, where you start understanding how the experience is coming together, makes you a much more cohesive organization and kind of helps the brand with creating that engagement and authenticity that you need.
Love that. I do think one thing I wanted to mention, there is one typical mistake that a task force can make when we think about organizational readiness. John, you had brought this up to me at one point, that ignoring the needs of smaller stakeholders who have revenue generating parts, who drive revenue for the business, but maybe they are a smaller stakeholder, making sure they are not left out of this process is key. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we come in from a Sapient perspective and help them is to make sure they don't miss that. I mean, so for example, what about my customer service people that call when there's a recall? What about the in-store reps that are doing, services, deliveries, pickup, curbside pickup? What's their input into this whole thing? You think about the little parts of the organization, the fulfillment companies that's actually doing the shipping of the packages and so forth. If they don't know some of what's going on in that process, again, it can break down. So making sure that you've identified all those stakeholders up front, no matter what their case in it. I think the Millen's term, you need a village, you need the whole village. You need everybody. I may never change content on the site or anywhere in the entire system, and I'm still impacting what's going on there. So from that perspective, it's also going to impact me. So I need to make sure they're aware, they're involved, and at least, look, everybody can't have input or you'll never get to a decision, but you need the awareness to make sure that everyone knows how it's going to work going forward.
Nice. Thanks for wrapping that up. That's great. And our last tip. This is a really, I think after this great discussion, diving into these other 4 tips, we want to, I think, leave our viewers here with some inspiration and to let them know that you actually can start with low-hanging fruit when it comes to starting this transition, starting this move to a modern tech stack from monolithic, or if you're just getting started, there is a way to start with some of the easier components first. There's a lot of value to doing that, to get some quick wins, if you will. So I guess I would want to know and want our audience to really understand how to identify the lowest hanging fruit. What's sort of the easiest, where is some of the easier places to start? John, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 ways to look at low-hanging fruit, and I think it's really important. How do I reduce costs? How do I drive revenue? And there's low-hanging fruit that falls in both of those areas. I have a huge team that's maintaining my content. I have a huge team that's doing regression testing every time I roll out a new promotion and so forth. Those are often areas where I can quickly make a difference, reduce costs that then can drive the opportunity to do more. So you think about the cost reduction side. Look, in today's economy, everybody has to think about where cost reduction can take place. Absolutely. And this is a way to do that through the low-hanging fruit. But let's be realistic. The way you're going to drive this type of program, this transformational program going forward, is you've got to drive new revenue streams. And so understanding, is it a specific part of your customer base that you want to go after? Is it bringing a new set of products on board through a marketplace that your clients didn't have access to before? Whether it's going a higher level of promotions and towards a certain set of individuals and driving them to the site more often. Those are the kinds of things we go in and look at, because you're going to have this long evolutionary roadmap where you do this full digital transformation. But you got to find ways to reduce cost, and most critically, you got to find new new streams of revenue to be able to bring in the business that then will drive the rest of the transformation. So we always, as part of the roadmap, when we come in and help define it, look for that low-hanging fruit that's running in parallel to the full evolution.
And I think to put a finer point on it, the visual media layer is absolutely one of those lower hanging pieces of fruit, if you will. So Millen, I'd love to have you talk about how that looks from the Cloudinary perspective, and how we kind of guide our customers and get them interested in building that visual media layer in as one of the early stages of their composable tech stack.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, what we see with a lot of our customers is there's really kind of two ways to look at this problem. One is to look at what benefit you're trying to derive. Are you driving towards a KPI of higher revenue, higher engagement? Is that the most important thing? The other is operational efficiencies. Is something slowing down your content velocity getting to market? And the third is agility. Did something change where you need to change? For example, you didn't have video and everybody else has video and you need to do that, right? So these are the three kind of benefits, if you will, that you have to look at. And then in all of that, you kind of look at a few use cases, right? So for example, is it a problem as far as conversions are concerned or website performance is concerned, where you need to go optimize those images and video because it's not performing well in a particular geography or on certain devices? Or is it a problem that the images are looking wrong and the videos are impossible to crop manually because there's so many devices and so many ways you need to reframe this? Well, then you can use an AI engine and automate that part of the process, for example. Or is it that you need more highly immersive experiences, right? They have to be more realistic. The brand has to shine through what you're presenting on your PDP, and people want to look at the fabric in great detail because they're buying everything online. They've decided online, maybe they pop into the store and they just pick it up. And now you have a problem with product returns because they don't look like the same color. They don't look like the same fabric that you promised. So that could be an area. So again, there's multiple ways to look at this. You look at your use cases, and then you look at the benefits, the KPIs you have. And then on the visual layer, you can start on any one of these. We have customers who came in just to speed up their photo shoot to PDP page velocity, right? It was taking months. We want to cut it down to days. So many ways to look at this, but I totally think you have to start with the low-hanging fruit and show constant progress and look at your ROI as you go into more interesting use cases there.
Absolutely. And I think, Nick, with the content management system, while that might not necessarily be low-hanging fruit, it's an enabler. It's something that gives you the agility to go after some of these easier pieces of the tech stack. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what we find is that, interestingly, when you're trying to identify new channels and or new forms of content, a lot of times it's easier to actually look at a new project and build on a smaller scale. I always use a mobile app as an example, but I think I'm starting to date myself because there's mobile apps obviously everywhere within our customer bases. But what we're finding is that there's a lot of really cool, VR is a topic that's come up quite recently with a lot of customers. There's a lot of really cool digital experience type use cases that are kind of cutting edge, maybe in more of a proof of concept stage in our customers. And what we're finding is that they're able to use these as test cases to then port back and develop strategy therein. So a lot of interesting success there.
Great. Okay. Any other comments or thoughts on this whole idea of low-hanging fruit? Anybody else want to jump in?
I just want to comment on something, Nick, you brought up, which is very interesting, VR, because everyone, when we talk about VR and AR, everyone starts immediately thinking, oh, that's metaverse. We're not quite ready for it. We have a lot of customers, for example, in very specific industries, like in furniture or art, for example, who are using 3D models to generate 2D images today. They are using augmented reality. And then many of the brands, the fashion brands, when you get into their flagship stores, are actually giving you an AR experience in the store as well. So it's kind of here already, and it's really fascinating how people are practically using it today for very, very specific use cases. So thanks for bringing that up, Nick.
Great. All right. So we've done it. We have walked through tip 1, think omnichannel. Tip 2, differentiate and hyper-personalize. 3, keep it simple. That's a great one. Organizational readiness. And lastly, start with the low-hanging fruit. So I guess I want to open it up before we finish up this discussion. John, any final thoughts from your side that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I think these 5 tips really cover, when you look at it from a broad perspective, how you are successful when you're doing a digital transformation. And bringing it back to the idea of composability, the reason why it is called a modern architecture is the idea of it does help you support the future. The monoliths have they've lived their life, and everyone's moving away from them. They've had their 5 years, 10 years. A modern architecture should give you 10, 15, 20 years down the road where you're constantly, back to the term, I overuse it, back to the ability to evolve, to be able to support that going forward. We did what we could 10 years ago. Those were the technologies that were there. But what's there today is to support everything from VR and AR to the metaverse is what's going to be needed to be successful in the future. And thinking about it through these 5 lenses, these 5 tips, will help you be successful when you're thinking about doing that transformation.
That's a great way to end. Thank you. What a terrific summary. And before we close everything up, I wanted to just take a second in case folks are not completely familiar with our organizations and our different companies. So as you can see here, just a little bit about Cloudinary. We have 10,000 customers, over 1 million developers using our platform. We have a very strong foothold in the enterprise space with 800 enterprise customers, 60 billion assets under management. You can see some of the really terrific well-known brands that are Cloudinary customers today. I wanted to share a little bit about Contentstack as well. There are 30,000 global users of Contentstack service or content management system in over 70 countries. And you guys are making 9.3 times API calls and 98.9% customer retention. So this is a much beloved mock certified offering here with Contentstack. And again, lots of amazing brands using this content management system around the world. And of course, Publicis Sapient. John, thank you so much for bringing your sage wisdom and advice today. You are a digital transformation partner, and I know you are a pioneer in the industry. You have a huge organization, over 20,000 people, 53 offices around the globe, servicing customers from all sectors. And we really appreciate you being here today. Milind, thank you so much for all of your great input and wisdom and advice as well. And Nick, much appreciated for your time and energy, bringing the great perspective of content management to this discussion. Really, really appreciate it. You will be able to access helpful content. We're going to share links and pieces of content, brochures, blog posts, infographics, all this great content that you can consume and learn a little bit more about modern composable architecture, about our specific companies if you'd like more information. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can see here we are including all of our email addresses in case you've got questions you want to dive into around any of the tips we've covered today or anything else. We're here for you and would love to take questions and comments from you. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to our speakers. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful day and we really appreciate your time.